Shalom Uvracha and a good Moed, a good Yom Tov, and welcome to the headline show to Yeshiva Shamayla. My name is Yehoshua Pfeffer. I'm filling in this week for David, who's away this week. And this week, as befitting the Moed, as befitting the time of Sukkos, we're going to be speaking about a topic which is especially relevant, especially pertinent for these days, and that is Simchas Yom Tov, the joy, the happiness, the contentment that we feel and that we're chayiv to feel on Yom Tov generally, and specifically on Sukkos. The Rambam tells us at the end of Hilchos Lulav, Perek Ches, the Rambam says that Afal Pisha Kol HaMoedos Mitzvah Lismayach Bahen, even though there's a mitzvah of simcha on all of the Yomim Tovim, but B'Chag HaSukkos Hais Hashem B'Mikdash Simcha Yesera. There was a special simcha, there was a unique simcha that went beyond, that transcended the other elements of simcha, of other Moyadim. Like it says, V'smachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem Shivas Yomim. The Rambam explains and describes the great simcha of the simcha space Hasho'eva. And then at the end of these halachas, the Rambam says, generally speaking, Hasimcha sheyismach Adam b'asiyas hamitzvah uva'avas hakel shetziva bahem avoda gedola hi, that the idea of simcha, the concept of simcha, is a great avoda of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He brings the pasuk Tachas asher lo yavadatos Hashem Elokecha b'simcha uvetuv levov, meaning that the Rambam emphasizes that this idea of simcha isn't just about enjoying ourselves. Of course, the Gemara tells us, the Chazal tell us the boundaries of simcha in a technical sense. It's wine, meat and wine, or it's new clothes, or it's giving candies to children. This helps us to reach a level of simcha in a technical way. But says the Rambam, this is also an avoda gedola. It's something which needs to be with us, not just on Yom Tov, but also throughout the year. And specifically in this time of Yom Tov, this time of Sukkos, which is the time where the pasuk says, V'hayisa ach sameach, that we reach a level of simcha which doesn't happen in the other Yomim Tovim. Only on Sukkos do we have this concept, this idea of V'hayisa ach sameach. You shall be truly, truly joyous. You shall be uniquely joyous for the time of Sukkos. So this is a wonderful opportunity to speak, to discuss, to try to delve deeper into the idea of simcha, because even though we know that Yom Tov is a joyous time, it's a time that we spend with family, it's a time that we're able to take time off from the everyday pressures and tensions of everyday life, and to really have a time where we're more besimcha, where we're more at joy and at ease with ourselves. But nonetheless, there's a lot to investigate, there's a lot to think about. How do we really reach the level of simcha that Chazal and that the Torah describe for Sukkos? Because even though there's a natural simcha for Sukkos, Sukkos is the Chag Ha'asif. It's when we gather in the produce from the fields into the homes, and therefore there's this natural simcha. But today, of course, we're a little bit detached, a little bit far from the idea of Chag Ha'asif. Chag Ha'asif is extremely natural for an agrarian society that circles, that is based on an agricultural society where people work the fields and bring in the produce towards this time of year. But for us, that we don't live in an agricultural, agrarian society, for us the whole idea of Chag Ha'asif is a little bit distant, and therefore we don't have this natural, simplistic, automatic even simcha of bringing things in from the field. How then do we infuse our times or ourselves with the simcha of Sukkos, with this special Simchas Yom Tov that HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects us to have, that this is a part of the Avodas Hayom. On the other hand, what's really the connection between the Chag Ha'asif on the one hand and the concept of Sukkos on the other? This special emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kiva Sukkos Hoshafti es Bnei Yisrael, that we went through the desert, whether Sukkos Mamash or whether Anani HaKavod. And perhaps more broadly, the whole concept that runs through the month of Tishri is the concept of Chaim, the concept of life. We begin Tishri with Rosh Hashanah, which is a din on Chaim, like the Rambam emphasizes, Per Gimel of Choshuvah, that this is a din on Chaim itself. We say throughout, Zachreinu L'Chaim, Melech Chofetz B'Chaim, and even on Sukkot, we dedicate a lot of our davening to the Hoshanos, to a prayer, a davening for rain, which is the crux, the very foundation of life is water. When we search for life, in other planets and other galaxies, then the most basic thing that people, we don't usually do this, but when scientists search for life in other galaxies and planets, they search predominantly for water. Water is a sign of life, and water is really what Sukkos is on the one hand all about, on the level of davening, on the level of prayer, on the level of the Hoshanos and the Arbas Haminim that are all dependent, contingent on water. In fact, the Arbas Haminim also represent life in a very basic way. The lulav represents the growth of life, this vertical growth that the lulav projects and represents. Life grows up rather than things that are not alive and they fall down. The Hadass represents the teeming activity of life. The Torah calls it anaf eitz avos. It's aveh, it's dense, it's thick. Life is dense, life is teeming with activity, life is thick. The esrog is beautiful, life is beautiful. It has an innate and inherent beauty that life represents. And of course, the arava, which represents the thirst for water, the thirst that life represents, both for water and for things physical, but also, of course, for things spiritual and for things that give us, that empower us to grow and to advance and to be on a journey as we go through life. And these ideas all reflect on the simcha that we're expected to have on Sukkos, and not just expected to have, but it's of course a great privilege, a great zchus that we're able to reach this level of simcha. But to really understand, to really appreciate what this simcha means and how we're able to reach it, how we're able to experience it on Sukkos. Sukkos flies by. We're so busy. We're busy with family. We're busy with children. We're busy with our Simchas Beisha Shoeva. We're busy with events, and it just flies by. And in order to help us to really contemplate, to think about, and to reach in an experiential way the simcha that we can reach during Chag HaSukkos, so we have three wonderful and profound guests today. Rabbi Reuven Leuchter, Shlita, a renowned Mashgiach that will give us very original thinking, very new thinking on the meaning of simcha and how we can achieve simcha. Rabbis Cowland and Rowe, both leading in the field of being mekarev, in the field of explaining what Judaism is all about, and how, in our context, how we're able to really translate the concept of simcha from the Torah and from Chazal into our modern reality, which, as I mentioned, is sometimes a little bit distant, a little bit foreign, a little bit estranged, seems to be a little bit estranged from where the Torah speaks about. And so, without further ado, we'll get right into our interviews, and Mir Hashem will have a really meaningful show, meaningful words of wisdom, but it should also be meaningful on a practical level to really help us to feel the special simcha, the depth of the simcha of Yom Tov generally and of Sukkot specifically. So, Baruch Hashem, we're privileged to have on today's show Rav Reuven Leuchter. Rav Leuchter is a renowned Talmid of Rav Shlomo Wolbe, Zechrono Livracha, a long-time Mashgiach in a number of yeshivas, today Rosh Kollel of Mei Hadat, a Kollel in Yerushalayim, and also a very sought-after speaker in many different frameworks. Rav Leuchter, thank you very much for joining us. It's really a pleasure and an honor. As a disclaimer, I'll say it's also my father-in-law, so it's even more of a pleasure and an honor. And let me open with a question, which is something which comes up in a number of different contexts. It comes up with perhaps Avas Hashem also, and in other contexts. But it's especially interesting now in the time of Sukkos, and that is, how is it, or how do we approach an obligation, a chiyuv, an avodah, like an avodah Hashem, of simcha, of being in a joyous state? To be in a joyous state, to be happy or joyous, is an emotion. It's something that we feel inside. Other than very technical things, how is it that we can understand this avodas hayom, this chiyuv or mitzvah of usmachtem lifnei, of being in a joyous state throughout the time of Sukkot, in a very specific time? How do we really experience that, and how do we understand that?
Yes, this is a problem. I try to answer that first with a approach of how you are evoking your feelings or your like Avos Hashem you said, or simcha or whatever it is, how you approach that you have to evoke that. The approach is, in the most productive way, is that you are recognizing an inner tension which is leading you to a situation that you are focusing on simcha or on ava. That means, for example, when you have Avos Hashem, you have to take into consideration that you are once in a while not really in a state of mind of loving the Borei Olam. You are not. But the Torah says you have to have ava to Hashem, and then that creates an inner tension. The point of work on a midah is not that you have to make a work. That's the today association with machines or things like this. That you simply have to put the knob, and then you are besimcha. Doesn't work like this.
You wind it up. But right, simcha is generally something more spontaneous. How do you work on something which is generally spontaneous?
Wait a minute. So I understand that, but I want to show you the tension which evokes in simcha from a very interesting point of view.
Okay.
Simcha is stemming from a state of mind that things are fitting you. Things are fitting you. When you are besimcha, when your koichas hanefesh are in sync with what you do, then you are in simcha. You can't be besimcha when your inner koichas are contradict your actions. Then you feel against the grid, and then you feel difficulties, and then you feel all these other feelings. But you feel besimcha when you feel in harmony with what you do. That's one side. And now the other side is a very interesting one. Simcha is always connected to a chidush. You are happy when something new arrives. An old thing is not really doesn't make you besimcha. Now, this is now a very interesting inner tension. Like, it has to be fitting you, but it has to be new. But it's like a contradiction. When a thing is fitting me, that means it's fitting me. It was yesterday fitting me too. But how can I create this happiness that something fits me, but it's new? So the point is, that is a special point in the simcha, in the Chag Sukkos, because the whole talich, the whole involvement of tshuva throughout the days till Yom Kippur was that I have to uncover how an action in Torah or a certain mitzvah is fitting me. This is the work. This is the work. I have to recognize that learning Torah or prayer or tzedakah is fitting me. I have to find that in me. Otherwise, I can't be chayzer b'tshuva, because Torah mitzvahs is a thing which fits me. Only throughout the year, this fitting of Torah mitzvahs, this was covered up. So I have to reveal that things are fitting me. That's not a emunah, that's not a belief. That is a very actual, practical work that you have to find. That learning Torah, for example, in my case, was learning Torah is really fitting me, is fitting my day, is fitting my activity, even though my activity is most of the day doing other things, speaking with people, and not sitting next to a Gemara and learning. But even though the learning action, the action of learning is very fitting me. But it is a new thing.
Let me just understand this. I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's say a person has a difficulty with, it could be Talmid Torah, it could be Tefillah, it could be other mitzvahs, it could be Shabbos, it could be any one of many mitzvahs and chiyuvim. If a person has a difficulty with it, it means that he is not finding the aspect or the way or the kind of the approach to that mitzvah that actually fits him. This is where he needs to.
I think so. That's what it is. It is, and this is very much a thing which people are not educated to look for that.
Right. Because you're saying it's not.
How can I approach learning in a different way than I approach it till now? That was for me also a big revelation, that I was able to approach learning in a certain very awkward way, which you wouldn't go for it, but it was fitting me. It was fitting. I tell you what. For example, I learn now Gemara Rashi, but I go over and over in a very mechanical way, which that fits me fine, because I have such a possibility in my personality to be a nudnik, to go over and over and over again. So I use that in learning. But it is a thing which is the action of learning like this is fitting me. That fits my personality. And then I said, wow, it is fitting me. And that is a big simcha, that it's a new thing. I revealed that. I found out. I just discovered that the thing is fitting me. That is the simcha of the Chag. And this is a very deep thing. Look, Yehoshua, it's a very deep thing. Because the point is, when you are, what you are doing normally when you're chayzer b'tshuva, you are chayzer b'tshuva towards the Shulchan Aruch.
Right, you're saying you're not trying hard enough, you're not good enough.
That you see the Shulchan Aruch,
right,
and you don't do it. But it's one thing lacking: the recognition of the Aveira. You don't recognize the Aveira; you recognize the Shulchan Aruch.
You recognize the distance between yourself and the Shulchan Aruch, but you don't.
Yeah, even more. Distance is too nice. You don't recognize the rottenness in yourself when you are not doing the mitzvah or do the Aveira. You don't recognize that. You recognize that you didn't do what it says. But the recognition of hate, of Aveira, is how far I was, how rotten I was. The way that Yecheskel Hanavi says, Kein atem oimrim, ki avonosenu oleinu, ubohem anachnu nimokim. We get rotten with these Averas. That is a recognition of Aveira. But when you do it in the way I tell you, that you see, look, learning is a very natural, a very close thing to me. I was rotten that I didn't do it. Then you can experience the tahara or the slicha of the Aveira, because you felt tome. But otherwise, everything is virtual. You are imagining that it's for sure. The Poira Olam says you have to do this mitzvah, and that would be very nice when you would do it. And you didn't do this very nice thing which you are obligated to do. So now I decided to do it, and now I am a real clean man. This is all virtual. You didn't feel rotten, and you can't feel clean. But when you approach tshuva in that way, that you are not thinking about, I have to change my personality. I have to do the thing in a way it fits me. Can you see, I was a rotten guy, why I didn't do it. And then I see it's a chidush. I get rid of that rottenness, and I find myself. That's a simchas achak.
Right. I find myself within the... right. You know, when you start speaking about that a person needs to be in sync with himself, this can be taken to mean, you know, a person does whatever, like Koheles says, a person does Yismach Bacho b'maisav, just go after his heart. But you're saying, no, you find your heart within the mitzvah, or you find your heart within that concept that you have a chesed in it.
In a very practical way, that there is a mitzvah going on, that means a mitzvah is going on, it is the action of the mitzvah which fits you. Look, let's say in the educational way, you today, the Americans for sure, they always go that there has to be a outcome, there has to be a product, there has to be a result of your mitzvahs, let's say.
Right, it needs to be measurable. We need measurable.
The result has to be that you know Torah, you know?
Right.
So now what do you do? Now look what you do. You look at the Gedolim and you say, you know what? Rabbi Yosef, he had that was working by him. So it sounds like that the way he learned is a way which functions. Let's learn the way Rabbi Yosef learned.
Right.
This is the most insane thing you can do.
Right,
because
absolutely.
the way he learned is not fitting you. It's not the result which has to fit with you. It's the way of the action which has to fit you. There you have to find yourself. Not in the result. Not, I want to be a Talmid Chochem. No, I don't want to be a Talmid Chochem. I want to learn. I'm a tshuva ve'oise. Oiskim b'teiro mitzvahs. I am oise in a way which fits me. That is what I do. And when I find that, then I find that I reveal that the Maisa Mitzvah is in sync with me. That means I have an affinity with that. That means I see it's a new revelation that something fits me. It's a new revelation that something fits me. That's a Simchas Achak.
But it seems though from this, I think, very, very deep and very fascinating approach. But it seems from this that the Simchas, the peak of the Simcha would then be Yom Kippurim, when you finish your process of tshuva and kapara.
That is the Tanchume. The Tanchume says, like Rishon Cheshbon Avonis. This Tanchume, he says, what means Rishon Cheshbon Avonis? You reached all the kapara in Yom Kippur, and you do a sukkah as a payment to what the Borei Olam did for you. What did the Borei Olam do for you? That he made you clean. How do you pay that? With a sukkah. With this avirah of kedusha, you go in, and the simchas achag you have. That's the Rishon Cheshbon. That it says there. The Rishon Cheshbon Avonis goes really back to Yom Kippur, but it is our bringing out ourselves on the backdrop of Yom Kippur, of the kapor of Yom Kippur. That's what the Talmid says.
So the way the Rambam says. The Rambam mentions concerning the Simcha of Sukkos, he mentions the Tachas Asher Lo Yavarta Asher Shem Elokecha B'Simcha. So with what you're saying, the Simcha is really, it's not something separate. It's a part of the Avodas Hashem. It's not something, something external or extraneous to the Avodas Hashem. It is within the Avodas Hashem itself.
Okay. And now listen to that, what you already mentioned, the Pasuk. Tachas Asher Lo Yavarta Asher Shem Elokecha B'Simcha of Miroiv Kol. You remember, that's the Pasuk, right?
Right.
We know from Yankov Avinu that there are two words which are like contradictory. Yesh li Rav, v'yesh li Kol. And suddenly over here, B'simcha v'tuv leiv miroiv Kol. What is roiv Kol? What does it mean? How do you translate that? You didn't work B'simcha miroiv Kol from lots of everything. What does that mean?
From bounty, right? From great bounty or something.
Roiv Kol. Do you know what Kol means? Kol means that there is a point in Avodas Hashem which you could go for it and base your Avodas Hashem on that point. The one has achrayus, the other one has commitment to truth, the other one has chesed. They are all different kind of nekudas in Avodas Hashem, which is called kol. Kol means always the central point, the one which is supporting the whole thing. That's called kol. And what means roiv kol? It means there are a lot of possibilities to base your Avodas Hashem without any structure. Really, roiv kol. It is like floating around in the streets. It could be this, it could be that, it could be this, and nothing was good enough for you. You didn't find the nekuda which fits you, miroiv kol, from all those nekudas which could fit you, and they would all be a basis in Avodas Hashem. You didn't find one of them? That's my taina. Miroiv kol, there are so many possibilities to connect.
The Torah can resonate with many different people in many different ways, and you had this range of resonance with the Torah, and you did not choose it. You were.
No, you didn't even see one. It's just in front of your nose, 100,000 possibilities, and not one is enough for you. Even one not. You see.
Yes, I see, and it's very interesting. Let me just ask one more thing concerning Sukkos, because Sukkos also seems to be that there is something very deep going on with our relationship, not just with ourselves, but with the world. Sukkos is a time when we take the Psolis Gerin V'Yekev, and we take the Arba'as Minim, and we go out into the world. How is this simcha idea that we're speaking about, how does this reflect on our relationship with the world outside, with what we see, with what we are relating to in this kind of Sukkos, this simcha experience?
Look, this is a whole shmuz by itself, but you have to understand. You have to understand the world in the world of someone which has avodas Hashem, makes it into a center. That doesn't have to be someone who sits in the Beis Medrash the whole day. That can be everyone. But avodas Hashem has something for him. Yeah, the world is a place of hush, is a place of a
sense.
You see, you sense the thing, and you have to understand. Hush is extremely hard. It's extremely powerful, and you can't combat that thing. You can't be stronger than your hush. The problem in our avodas Hashem that our hush tells us the opposite thing than what the people tell us what Torah wants. You say the whole world is Hevel Havolim. Yeah, that's good to say, but the hush doesn't say it.
And as long as the hush, right. And our intuitions are not right. They do not.
And whenever you don't, with the chush says the other thing, it won't be matzliach. The whole point of simcha is that your chush tells you Torah is fitting. That's an unbelievable revach entering the world, because the world tells you the whole time, 24/7, that all different kind of things are fitting you.
Right, meaning the world tells you that davening is boring, for example. This is what the world tells you.
That's right. Or the world tells you that the text message of your friend, which that could be a business or whatever it is much more important than saying Shmona Esrei. That the world tells you the whole time.
Right.
And when you find that tefillah is fitting you, you are creating the biggest antidote or the biggest possibility to measure up with these messages of the world, because you create an affinity with avodah, and then you are able to stand in this milchama that the world tells you other things. No, I know that the Chush says this. Yeah?
It's not. It's less about the world, more. It's giving us our different perspective on the world. And this is a part of the sukkah, that you go into the sukkah, it gives you a certain perspective on the world, which is in sync or in resonance with your avodah of Yom Kippur and so on, of finding this connection.
Yeah, I think so. Okay?
Good. Wonderful. Okay, I think there's a lot of material here to contemplate for our sukkahs, to sit in the sukkah and to think about. Mamash, thank you very, very much for being with us. It was fascinating and really a very new, like you said, new things make you besimcha. So I'm sure that this will bring a lot of simcha to many people. Now it's their turn to work with it and to see how to integrate it. So, Shkar Gadol, thank you very much, and good mayed.
Good mayed, Carlton.
Good mayed, Carlton. So with us now, we're privileged to be joined by Rabbi Daniel Rowe. Rabbi Rowe is CEO of Aish UK. He's also a bachelor's and master's in philosophy from University of London, and also a very sought-after speaker. You can see some of his both lectures and also debates on the web. So, Rabbi Rowe, thank you very much for being with us today. It's really special to have you with us. And thank you. And perhaps just by way of introduction, even before we reach the specific issue of the simcha, the joy of Sukkos, maybe it's worth dwelling for a moment on the general concept of simcha in Judaism in general. I know there are different ways of translating the word simcha. Maybe you want to dwell on that for a minute also. Is it joy? Is it happiness? Is it contentment? How exactly would we translate it? And why do we find such an emphasis on simcha in the Psukim, for example, Tachas Hashem Le'avato Hashem Le'kecha B'simcha, Rabbi Levov, the Rambam Hilchos Sukkah, Rabbi Bechaya, they understand the pasuk very simply, that there's a certain duty or a certain, certainly a very great virtue of being Oved Hashem, b'simcha, relating to the world, relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a simchadic way. Why is this actually such a central and important idea to Jewish practice?
Well, yeah, it's amazing because as kids we all sung the mitzvah Gedolos to Simcha Talmid, and I remember when
Rabbi Nachman, it's Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, right?
Yeah, and went through the Dayan mitzvahs. I was very surprised to find that the Rambam doesn't list Simcha as a specific mitzvah, Simcha Yom Tov, but not a specific. But you're right, the Rambam brings it to the end of Hilchos Lulav, and there I think he gives us an enormous clue into how important it is, and into something along the lines of where the definition of simcha goes. And the line he uses, simcha sheismacha adam b'astiyat mitzvah, or ahavas hakel shetiva b'em. So simcha is clearly in doing the mitzvah, but also the simcha in the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That he says avodah gedol, it's hard work. But when he speaks about people who don't do it, he says that it's a person who's megas starts over cholek kavod la'atzmo. In other words, the alternative to simcha is self-centeredness. It's looking for one's own kavod. That implies that simcha, and in fact he says it. He talks about somebody who's mashbilatzmo, mekel gufa b'mkametelu. The anova is simcha. In other words, self-centered life is not simcha. So any joy a person gets out of their own self-achievement and their own self-centeredness, whatever it is, and then looking for their own honor, that is not simcha. It might be hololus, it might be something else, but it's not. Simcha comes out of humility. Simcha comes out of some kind of sense of relationship with Hashem, where we're letting Hashem be the center of our lives and not ourselves. And you see it's also in when the Torah uses the word simcha, it's almost always in the context, if not always, of sharing with others. There's a mitzvah to be sameach, to make sure that the ger and the Levi and everybody else are simcha. So simcha seems to therefore, let's work with a natural sense around the concept of happiness. It certainly involves a very deep movement away from a self-centered reality, which can never really generate simcha. I mean, that's all of Koheles is obviously pushing that point. And real simcha comes out of something much deeper. And I think, the Rambam is very careful to be mechalik in halacha, the difference between hololus and simcha.
Hololus, right? He actually mentioned in that Hilchos Lulav the idea of hololus.
Yes,
but exactly. I think this point is a very interesting idea. You're saying that real simcha, or at least as defined in the Torah sense, is a simcha of being in relationship with others, meaning that this would definitely bear upon how we would choose to translate the idea of simcha. You know what I mean? What you're saying is you can't be besimcha when you're on your own, or when you're not in relationships. Good relationships, deep relationships with others, with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, these are the basic sources of a person's simcha?
Basic source of a person's simcha, and the truth is, even if you want to translate it as something like happiness, it's an interesting point that in all the modern research into happiness, we find a similar thing, that actually a self-centeredness cannot really yield any serious happiness. It can yield very short-term, very fleeting something, but it's always counterfeit. It's never real. It's everybody understands that no matter what the accumulation of wealth is, that relationship is much more significant, and everybody understands how significant doing something meaningful is. This plus that's Torah mitzvahs, obviously, but even go to any human being in the world, they will know that they'd rather their child gives their life, let's say, than kills lots of innocent people. So people understand that there's a hierarchy. There's my own self. There's a connection with others around me, which is much deeper. And then there's a connection with doing the right thing in the world in general, which is even deeper than that, and so forth. And I think the deeper we go, so the Moshe once brought the shame, one Talmid Arizal, about the tree, and every twig in a tree can feel separate from each other and be battling with each other, and then they suddenly realize we're actually all part of the same branch, and then we're all part of the same bough, and we're all part of the same trunk. And the deeper we go, the more we come to the root of everything, which is Avas Hashem. So simcha is accessing a deeper part of who we are, which by definition will involve more and more connection. Right? So the Ramban says, okay, how can it ever be kamoicha? It's still okay, behave like kamoicha. But there's an oimek here where on some very deep level, within all of Klal Yisrael, there is a kamoicha. And maybe on a very, very deep level, ultimately with all of Adam and all of the Bria and all the way back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So that is ma'ora, that's where simcha comes from. And every time we put ourselves at the center, we kill simcha. And every time we we search a deeper sense of self and connectedness, that's when that's when simcha comes in.
Right, very, very interesting. This definitely recollects the pasuk in Shir Hashirim. Imyeten kol hon beisei, ba'avura ava b'ozer v'uzulei. A person will give all of his ba'avura ava. We would call this it's not commensurable. Irrecommensurability, I think we would call it. Something that can't be compared at all. The ava on the one hand, the relationship, and accumulation of wealth, which, like you said, can give you a certain high of some sort, but it's not quite the same. So let's assume that as a working definition, whether vis-a-vis with respect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu or with other people. Why is this then so central to Sukkos? Sukkos is this central, or is this a defining element of Sukkos, and how?
Well, it has to be central, because every time the Sukkos speak about Sukkos, there's the simcha, the Arba Minim.
Right, Samachta b'chagecha and v'hayisa ach sameach, a pasuk which is remarkable, right? That you shall be solely sameach. So how would you link the definition you've spoken about with the festival of Sukkos?
Well, I think the whole point, whenever we stand still in this world, there's a gravity point of self-centeredness. When we realize that Olam Hazeh is a journey, and that's what we're doing, the minute we're living outside of ourselves and we look around at how Hashem wants the world to be, then we realize that it's not there. So our entire life and existence becomes being about a journey to Shleimus of ourselves, a journey to Gilui Shechina in the world. So it's this sense of life as a journey. And again, even in a secular context, a person who thinks deeply realizes that whenever we try to stand still in this world, that's where misery comes in. Because we can't, because time is moving, because life is short, because it's not possible. You can build whatever structures, psychologically and subconsciously, human beings want to be forever. So we build these massive houses, or we build these financial empires, or we build names on buildings. We're trying to be here forever, but we're not going to be here forever. And whenever a person understands that they're on a journey, that's when simcha starts to kick in. That's the other aspect of simcha, is that we're on some kind of sense of journey and movement and growth and development. And people realize this in businesses, where there's an excitement for starting something new. We realize it in relationships. We realize it when we give birth to a child, that the simcha of this is a key, there's a potential, there's a future, there's a journey over here. That sense of simcha is really the hashkafa of the world. And all Yom Tovim touch it. Because all Yom Tovim touch some aspect of the journey of Klal Yisrael, and they touch some aspect of our journey. Shabbos is actually slightly different. Shabbos, we don't usually use the word simcha. We talk about oineg. It's a sense of touching the destination of Olam Haba. The Maharal says Yom Tov is like Mashgiach. It's like an Erev Shabbat. It's like a
right. Shabbat, if you want, is built in. Shabbat is like built into the week. It's part of the time continuum it's kind of built in, whereas the Yom Tovim represent a certain destination, if you want, or a certain milestone that we touch.
Right. And of them all, Sukkos does. So, in other words, Yom Tov is like recognizing the power of the journey, and Shabbos is recognizing the power of the destination. But Yom Tov but therefore, of all the Yom Tovim, Sukkos is the most journey-oriented. We literally live inside the vehicle of a journey, whether it's Ananei Kavod, or whether it's the Sukkos of Shabbos B'nai Yisrael, whichever pshat we learn. This is the journey. We are living the journey. That's what we're doing. We're living what it's like. And it's amazing, actually, in the first sugya of Masechah Sukkah, right? The Sukkah is 20 hours high as possible. There's 3 reasons given in the Gemara. One is I should be conscious of the schach reminding me of the journey. One is the Sukkah right, in Olam Haba, when the world gets over, we're in Sukkah. And one is Diras Arai. It's meant to be small enough that the dimensions don't require permanent structure. Those are really the 3 hashkafas of how to live life. If you look at Mesilas Yesharim in the first chapter, he says, first of all, the world's built, this Anaged Hashem and Ha'os is really Olam Haba. And in other words, we're in a Diras Arai.
Meaning one of them reflects on where we're heading, one of them reflects on the fact that we're on a journey, and one of them reflects on the kind of transient nature of it.
It to some degree, exactly. And actually, what I'm saying is Mesilas Yesharim has 3 different levels of looking at that, because then he says, that you look deeper, and the second time he already starts to include, and even in Olam Hazeh, you can touch the Veikas Hashem. and then the whole world's a big battle. Although ultimately it'll be an Olam Haba. And then he says there's a Tamik Oibin, and you'll see that the whole world's a Shemesh Adam. So if we think about those three levels, that's really what it is. The last chat in the Gemara there, the world is a Diras Arei. When I realize it's temporary, I realize my entire life is about being on a journey of Dveikus B'Hashem, I experience ultimately in Olam Haba. When I go deeper, I realize that even on this journey, I can be touching Hashem all the time. That's like the Mitzrayim. That's the journey out of Mitzrayim, where you could feel the Shekhinah, even though we're heading towards an even greater expression of it. And then finally comes the possibility of actually living in this world as Olam Haba in this world. So I think Sukkos is really that sense of the hashkaf of being on this journey, of how we look at life. And that's ultimately the journey. So there's two aspects of simcha we covered. One is breaking out of self-centeredness into depth, into Dveikus B'Hashem, into connection to other people. And two is living life as a journey and not trying to stand still. Which
are related to a certain degree, because when you're self-centered, when you're just with yourself, then you're, as it were, you're standing in the same place. The way in which we're able to grow is by touching others, is by receiving the input that we need to receive, whether from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the Torah, or from other people, and that allows us to move and to grow and to really be on a journey. But let me just clarify something concerning Sukkos. I mean, it seems, if you reading the Psukim in Vayikra, in Bamidbar, that the simcha of Sukkos is also related to the very human, very basic idea of the Chag HaAsif, meaning the fact that we're bringing things home, the fact that we're celebrating, as it were, with the nature that we're able to bring into our houses. That the Rambam says that the main simcha is with David Minim, which taking elements of the world and bringing them close to us, and a celebration, as it were, of things that are there in the world. Does that fit into the scheme of the simcha that you're speaking about, of being on a journey? Is it like defining, in a certain sense, how we look at the world?
Well, I mean, you think it's Chag HaAsif, the moment where the harvest is finished. So there's now two perspectives. One, that's it, I'm done. I am the happy.
I'm done for now, but I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, though.
Right, but in antiquity, in fact, until relatively recently in history, once you had your grains, you knew where your food supply was for the next 18 months. So you could think, I don't need to worry. I'll worry about around Pesach time, the next harvest. That's one perspective. Or you could say one thing: I've accumulated all of this, and now I have the tools. Now first I can touch and be makitov to Hashem. But now I have the tools. What am I going to do with all of this? Where's my journey? That's exactly the two questions you can ask. And so this is good for the exact time where we need to be turning around and saying, 1 second, let's remember what this is all about. Yes, Chag HaAsif. Yes, the celebration of everything we've got. But what we're really celebrating when the food is here is the future, right? So what am I going to do with this food? Am I just going to eat it? Or am I going to use it to do tremendous things in the year ahead? I've got the fuel for the journey, right? The fuel arrives at the plane. Do we just applaud it and that's it? Or do we say, now let's think where we can go with this fuel? What can we do with all of this? The investment is here. What can we build with it? That's exactly where we want to start moving. And Arba Minim, you're right. Arba Minim, that's what's that? So again, there's simpler levels. It celebrates the general growth of everything in the year, but there's so much depth, and we all know. The Midrashim of Bein B'chai is a different Ramazim, but whichever Ramaz we're going to follow is always going to be about 4 distinct polarities that are actually different. You know, if it's different types of people with Maisim and learning, without either, with one or the other, or whether it's different Evorim in a guf, for example, different limbs. Is it the spine which gives stability, or the heart which allows for locomotion and movement? You know, eyes being out, mouth speaking out. So that the different modalities and polarities. And on a very simple level, or not such a simple level, what that generally expresses is there's a lot of diversity in the world, and diversity at first glance produces a sense of chaos, meaninglessness. Things don't make sense. And, a world where one thing's one way, one's the other, and yet they become a chodim b'yadin. We bring them into one. It's interesting that usually when Torah wants to speak about things being chaotic, there's the number 4. Like in the first pasuk in the Torah, the 4 phases of darkness, Torah, Voy, Cheshach, and Pnei Time. But or for Goliath, so Goliath is always Arba Kamposarit, and the Hebrew letter Dalut, which literally means impoverishedness, is 2 lines that cross each other. So it's the same. Whenever we drop anything in 3-dimensional space with gravity, it will move in 4 directions. So it's chaos. It's me, and then we bring it all together, And that bringing together is that sense of the fifth element, like the letter Hey, which is like a dalet. Everything's distinct, and yet it all comes together, that little dot that brings everything together. So it's that experience of we're on this journey, but to that point where we'll all come together and all be one. And that point, of course, the number 5, which Chamisha is an anagram of the word simcha. And that is the fifth, it's like that point in history where we bring Mashgiach. That's also the same letters as Sameach. So we're touching that incredible sense of this is a journey, but it's a journey where we're heading to the place where everything will suddenly come together and make sense. And that's that's another aspect.
Right, very, very interesting. Let me throw this out and tell me what you think. It seems to me that you're speaking about two things which come together in a fascinating way, because on the one hand, we're speaking about a very personal journey, meaning a person's own kind of sentiment, his emotion of simcha, contentment, joy, however we want to translate it, but it's his own personal being on a journey, being in relationships, in good relationships, and so on. That also challenge us to rise and to continue growth and so on. But perhaps drawing from that is also this kind of ethical imperative of how to use the world or how to relate to the world. That the world isn't for my own kind of self-centered purposes, but it's rather for the good of the greater good, or the greater good of the Jewish people, of humanity, of bringing to light HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the world. Meaning the kind of this simcha idea works both in terms of my own personal emotion, but also as a kind of ethical imperative. Is that somehow on the mark?
Yeah, and I think that dichotomy, which you sometimes pick up in philosophy and ethics of virtue versus, let's say, ethical imperative, categorical imperatives, others, that's a dichotomy which I don't think is native to Torah, in the sense that it's like the question, am I doing it for myself or am I doing it for the world type of thing? Am I abnegating myself? And perhaps, one way I remember many years ago in Shen, I don't remember who said it, but it resonated so powerfully, you just see it everywhere, is ultimately, there's no such thing as doing something without yourself. Selfless behavior is a contradiction in terms, but the question is, who is the self? On a very superficial level, if all my self is defined by, this protoplasmic body being thing here, and the rest of the world for me to take from, that's catastrophic. But it also won't give me simcha, because it's not who I am. It might be where I start from, my sense of identity, but it's not who I am. When I go deeper and deeper, because ultimately I'm a chelek Eloka Memal, ultimately I'm an expression of Ratzon Hashem. So the deeper I go into me, the more I find the oneness with everything else. And then something arises which almost says that's right, and that's the simcha that flows from there naturally. And so it's actually the question of, is it about self-fulfillment or self-actualization? In the very superficial sense, no, but in the deeper sense, absolutely. Because the deeper sense of self is exactly where I touch the whole of Klal Yisrael, exactly where I touch the whole of Malchus Shamayim, of the whole of what humanity is here for, of the whole of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Ratzon itself. So at that point where the simcha flows most powerfully like a spring flow, then I've touched who I am. And that emotional overflow is a natural consequence of aligning myself with reality and breaking out of illusion. And breaking out of self-centeredness.
Right, very, very interesting. So you would not like the word altruism, for example, which is often interpreted to mean take out any kind of self-interest or the sense that I am personally involved, I'm just doing this for someone else. You would say that's not a Torah concept.
Well, one has to be careful. I mean, people use it, or definitely use it, but I think it all depends. Everyone's always using words in the particular context they're talking. So if we mean, as opposed to the superficial, when we use the word selfishness, what we're really grabbing at is when I identify myself with this body, and yes, that we should be altruistic, mean break beyond. But when we're focusing on the question from this level, then actually on a certain perspective, it's a deepening of self. It's a negation of the superficial self and an arrival at a much deeper place. But you could also use the word self. We just got to be so careful because we live in a self-centered world. Sorry, my brain's gone. We live in a self-centered world here. So whenever we use words like self-actualization, it probably conjures up the wrong sort of imagery. But yes,
right.
at another level, that, I think
right. There are delicate language issues here, which what exactly people mean when they use certain terms that can be interpreted in different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes
no, go ahead.
When you see different Seforim, we think there's Machlokias because they use a word here and the other one says you can't use that word. But they're using a different context in different ways. But I think what this concept seems to be the core, very deep unifying principle behind a lot of this.
Right. Well, let me just ask you one final question, because it's very interesting to take all of this discussion, which I think is first of all fascinating, and second of all has a lot of very deep ideas and profound ideas. And then to bring it kind of down to earth to the halacha, because when we look at the Rambam, based on the Gemara, Paskan Shulchan Aruch, the idea of simchas haregel is expressed in extremely down to earth kind of terms. Drinking wine, eating meat, buying gifts for your wife, candies for the kids, and so on. How do these very simple and very, extremely down-to-earth kind of concepts of simcha, how do those serve as a kind of springboard to reach the kind of ideas that we've been discussing up until now?
Well, there's obviously different levels, different layers, because all these things, buying clothes for some, buying clothes for your wife, buying things for children, and even meals, which are meals are almost by definition brought together. Bring people together. It's first of all, it satisfies physical needs, which can't be negated and neglected altogether. But it brings also, so to speak, in the mashal of the body being like the kind of drunk who holds the lame person that dances with them. So in that sense, there is some of that. But there's also the sense of togetherness. Food is something that brings people. You have a chosh of a meal, you bring people together. So yes, it might need boss of a yayin to get something going, but obviously we want to go beyond that too. So in practical acts, that will be the baseline, the beginning point, and maybe a person doesn't like meat or something else, but something that starts the process, because at the end of the day, we're biological organisms. At the end of the day, we want every bit of us to be illuminated, but even how we eat. There's different ways of eating. There's a way of eating which is, I'm an animal, let me gobble and focus on how great the steak tastes. And then there's a sense of I can eat, but also taste how much goodness was put into this. If somebody else cooked it for me, what gratitude I have for them. Obviously, the gratitude I have for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He could have made a world where we have a biological need to eat, like we have a biological need to excrete, to go to the bottom. So, and it would not be a nice experience, but we have to do it. Instead, he made it b'chein, b'chesed, b'rachamim, that it can taste nice, that we can be makeh. So there's a lot can be going on, and obviously we're sitting with people, and that. But it's a beginning of a journey into simcha. So simcha can go way beyond that. In basic mikdash.
Right, meaning the halacha is, as it were, you would say the halacha is given us the baseline. This is where you begin from. Don't neglect these, basic and simple concepts which are essential and necessary, but you would say also don't leave it there alone, meaning there's a lot further to go, and specifically on Sukkos, where reaching a certain climax of simcha, as it were, so that certainly takes us beyond.
That's exactly where the Rambam puts the extra levels, the floor is simple there, that's what you got to start with, but the ceiling, the avodah gedolah, the real beautiful work, that the Rambam puts right there in the end of Hilchos Lulav. This is where Sukkos is meant to take us.
Amazing. Rabbi Rowe, thank you very much. Anything that you'd like to add to that? That I've missed? Don't want to miss anything. In Hiddur Mitzvah B'Simcha, I think is a very nice Hiddur. So if you have any Hiddurim for us.
I'll tell you very nice. In Kaheles, it's interesting. You should take a look at Kaheles. I mean, giving now a 30-second glimpse. Because obviously Kaheles is part of Shlomo Melech's journey out of the time when we see the Maharal, Ashmedai had taken him over, and he was really possessed in this negative state. And in the early Prokim, whenever he's struggling, he almost always begins with the Ro'isiani Belibi. He recognized that he saw Chochmah was greater than Simchas, but Ro'isiani Belibi isn't really greater because we all die. It's all this struggle with his lave. And right near the end of the Sefer, he gives this clue. Right at the end of the second last parak. He said just before that, Smach Bacha Bial Desecha, Yishav Simcha, but the Haser Kas Milibecha. And earlier on he said if Yosef Chochma, Yosef Das, Yosef Macha, Yosef Chochma, Yosef Kas. So in other words, a lave that's still got kas inside it, that's got anger, that's got resentment, is a heart that cannot really experience reality, and it can't experience simcha. And it's a very powerful thing. We went to Yom Kippur. We were busy asking everyone for Mechila. But to the extent to which we're moichel others and we can let go of that resentment and that anger, it opens us up to whole depth. So that's it, if a person struggles with simcha in life, very often the question is, am I holding on to resentment? Are there people or things in this world that I'm really grudging against? And is that demon living inside me? If I can rid myself of that, if I can find it within me to forgive others, to forget, to let go. And some people have life situations where that's not a simple possibility. But to whatever extent we hold on to whatever extent the things that are afflicting us are petty, I'm not talking about major issues like abuse or something, but to whatever extent there's petty squabbles and whatever it is, when we let them go, we become deeper people. And then we open ourselves up. So long as we hold on to hatred of others, we're also hating ourselves, we're also hating some aspect of the world, which means that whether we admit it or not, there's some aspect of blocking out our Kodesh Baruch Hu. And that's what Shlomo Melech, I think, amongst the many things that Kadosh is telling us. You've got to open that lave up, and then everything else can work. And
amazing,
when we do
amazing.
It's a tremendous simcha.
Yeah, this is a kind of new take on why Sukkos follows on from Yom Kippur, which often is understood the other way around. That with the forgiveness of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, then we can truly be besimcha. But this is like an additional angle on that. That when we forgive others, then we can actually reach the highest peak of simcha once our heart is cleansed of resentment or of bearing a grudge. Beautiful. Rabbi Rowe, thank you very, very much for being with us. Inspirational stuff. And Emir Hashem, you together with all our listeners and all of Klal Yisrael should all have a good and a simcha samayed and a good Yom Tov. So thank you very, very much.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Shekach. So joining us today, we're privileged to have Rabbi Jamie Cowland, who, aside from being a close friend and associate in Ramat in Yerushalayim of mine, he's also a very close Talmid of Rav Noach Weinberg, Zichrono Livracha, was deeply involved in the founding and running of Aish UK and later Aish Yerushalayim, and also, perhaps most prominently, founder and CEO of the Justifi organization, which involves bringing Yidden, bringing Jews from around the world and to different places around the world and connecting them to their Judaism through ideas and deepening their awareness and their spirituality within Judaism. Rabbi Cowland, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, it's so nice to be here, Rabbi Pfeffer. How are you doing?
Baruch Hashem, enjoying Yom Tov very much. It's really a Simchas Yom Tov experience, and it's good you asked, because the topic of today is Simchas Yom Tov. And I wanted to open with the following question, which is something which I think many people, just reading the Torah itself and having a basic understanding of what Chag HaOsif means. Chag HaOsif is a festival of gathering, and in times of antiquity and later, till modern times, when society was mainly an agrarian society, a society that was based around agriculture, then the whole idea of Simchas Chag, of Usmachtem, being joyous during the Sukkos time, was something very intuitive. People were happy and joyous because they brought home their crop, they brought home the produce. And the question is, how do we take that and apply it to our modern society, which is very distant, very detached from the whole agricultural cycle of the year? So how do we apply this Chag HaOsif concept with the almost intuitive, automatic, inbuilt simcha that goes with it? How do we feel that? How do we experience that in our modern, very detached from, as it were, even estranged from the agricultural cycle that we live in today?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and I think it's a broader question that needs to be asked across the whole gamut of mitzvahs. Often, although we're going to focus specifically on Sukkos today, but as I said, I think this is a question that can be asked in the context of many mitzvahs, where the actions that we do seem rooted in a paradigm that's a little different than the one that we're in today, and that it's necessary, therefore, to establish some kind of connection to make things more relevant. But specifically when it comes to Sukkos,
you're right. For example, Trumas and Maestros, for example, it becomes more of a ritual than something with the deeper meaning that the Torah seems to infuse into it. But Sukkos, it's so relevant to all of us. It's something which is, 7 days a year, 7 days a year, we're really part of this. We're part of this experience, while at the same time being distant from, seemingly distant from the way that it's represented. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, so Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in his Chorev kind of addresses this right out of the gate. And he really characterizes the concept of Sukkos, and he then goes into a very beautiful breakdown. Maybe we'll speak that out, during the conversation, of both the Sukkah and of the Lulav and Esrog as two very different but very connected mitzvos that are really about how the correct Torah approach to relating to the concept of physical abundance, or unfortunately, a lack of physical abundance if a person is experiencing that, and how to infuse both experiences with spirituality. Now that seems to be his approach. I mean, he immediately pulls it back out of the purely agricultural and create something that's very relatable to any environment. Today, agriculture for us, that's our bank account, right? Okay. I guess, on some level. And he, if I can just quote him, he says, the festival of Sukkos is dedicated to the physical preservation of the Jewish people by Hashem. It's the time when the year's harvest is almost completed. Your granary in your house is full, and you're no longer in a panic about what's going to be in the year, or maybe it's been meager, and you're really worried about what's going to be with you and your wife and your children. You might grow despondent, and then he moves on into a description of what the symbolism of Sukkah and the symbolism of Lulav is as a direction for dealing with it. So I think that as a starting point, Hirsch brings this in as being something, I would say maybe even at least as much relevant, maybe even more relevant than in yesteryear, but very much connected.
Right, but I mean, the question would still be though, let's say a person has wealth, or he has a certain abundance. Certainly some organizations towards September, they begin budgeting for next year, and this year is coming to an end. So I suppose there is some element of coming to the end of the year in that sense also. But what does Sukkot mean for that, and why is this related to simcha? How is this again the element of joy, the element of being happy with what you have, and with the Kadosh Baruch Hu's hashkacha or supervision or presence within that? How do we bring that out into our bank accounts? How does that work?
Yeah. So look, the explanation seems to be, or at least one direction, is to say as follows: whatever your physical situation is, whether it's wealth or whether, God forbid, it's poverty, okay, you need to leave your house. You need to leave your house. And you need to understand that neither your wealth or your talents are really a god, meaning they don't really make you more secure. Really, only Hashem does, and that a person needs to take time in this flimsy shelter to really thank Hashem for your reality, for your talents, for your wealth. That you need to remember that everything might change. But you got to be careful. You got to check yourself every year for these 7 days that you're not becoming a slave to wealth and being led away from Hashem. That you're learning to truly feel safety under Hashem's protection. That He has a plan for you, both in the Sukkah and then when you come back out afterwards, after the Chag, that you can continue that feeling of safety under His protection, which will allow you to express yourself in the world in a way that's more ironclad ethically. That you have confidence to really live in the world as a Jewish person, and to address the agricultural question like super directly. He focuses on two aspects of the sukkah: that the walls really need to be permanent. They need to be, they need to be made of real things. But the schach really needs to be very natural. It can't be Mechaber tumor. It's got to really, it's really got to be something that we haven't that we haven't, so to speak, mixed ourselves into too much, right? It's what Hashem provides.
And what does that represent? This mix of the, let's say, the man-made with the natural, the untouched. How does he frame this combination?
He explains you've got to be in the real world. That's the walls, with a sense of emunah, and that's the schach. That a person's really got to learn how to live, kain taduru, bring your couch out there, really be there, really live there, at the same time with an understanding that there's a natural process going on that you've got to not be frightened of. You've got to be able to surrender to that and live with that, live in rhythm with that, and trust Hashem as the fundamental. That's why I think it's on top. Yeah, it's above you, so to speak. Hashem's protection.
Meaning to say that, and that itself is the simcha sachag, in that you're less panic stricken when you're in times of, let's say, in times of times that are challenging or times that are tough. Then you know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still supervising and that He's still looking out for you. And then in times of abundance, you also know that, the abundance, it doesn't, not everything is contingent on that. You're not worried, maybe I'm going to lose it, who knows what the coming year is going to bring, because you have this underlying emunah, which is not just like Yetzias Mitzrayim emunah, which is like a one-time revelation, but it's bringing the emunah into your life, into the world, into everything you do, into your bank account. That's where you would be. That's where you're taking this.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if you connect that to the idea of the lulav, for example, the lulav and esrog, the people talk about the hadas means this, and the esrog means this, the lulav means this, the aravos means this, and there's many metaphors, but the basic idea of things that don't really require the hand of man to finish them off, which is symbolized by the hadasim, things that men need to work on to extract benefit from, like food, which is more like the lulav, again the esrog, things that entirely depend on man to be of use, more like wood, they've nothing in them really unless you work on them, like the aravot. So the idea again there is to kind of learn how to, sukkah negates the value of the physical, but lulav links us with our dependence on the physical. And what emerges is the proper approach, and that's really where the simcha comes in, right? You got to understand that. I think the idea is we have to understand that we're above our property, right? But we also have to exalt and elevate our property as gifts, and that we need to dedicate all of them to our role as individual Jews, and to our role as Jews within Klal Yisrael, the mission of Am Yisrael and the mission of us as individuals. And that simcha is really achieved when all aspects of your life are imbued with purpose and meaning. And I think that's really the point over here. It's very hard to be happy with aspects of when aspects of your life, major aspects of your life, are not imbued with meaning. They're not imbued with purpose. So Sukkos really forces us, if we take it seriously and really spend time in the sukkah and really thinking about this stuff, it forces us to subjugate the physical life away from it just a desperate rush of like, oh my gosh, I got to deal with this. This is like, it's so pressing, which it is. I mean, there's real pressure. But to learn how to subjugate that and to crunch it down and to imbue it with meaning and purpose, that I as a Jew live with emunah, as a part of Am Yisrael I live with emunah, I fight for emunah, I want to build a world of emunah, and all of my property, all of my efforts, as the Mesilat Yesharim says, B'kol asher hu omer, kol yemei chayav, everything that we do, that's where the simcha comes in, when we unify everything in aguda, we create, everything is imbued with this idea of purpose and meaning, connection to Hashem, emunah, which leads to simcha.
Mm-hmm. Right. So again, to frame this, we know the Chazal tell us mar b'nechasim, mar b'da'aga, mar b'daiga, meaning generally, in a natural sense, people on the one hand try to accumulate as much wealth as possible, but that wealth itself has a certain bitterness to it, because you begin to fear and to worry, what's going to happen? Will I keep it? Won't I keep it? What will happen? And you're saying the kind of antidote to that, the way to refrain or to avoid that natural kind of living with daigo, living with anxiety about your possessions, is to imbue them with this meaning, with this relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu that gives them a certain elevation, a certain meaning beyond the nechasim per se, and then you don't have the daiga element. It brings to light, or it certainly reminds us of the Kohelet message, which is not by chance we read Kohelet on Sukkos, which tells us on the one hand about the vanity, or the troubles, if you want, or the difficulty, whether philosophical or emotional, phenomenological difficulty of living with the world, but also gives us a message of that's where we are. That there's nowhere else we can live, and therefore Eso Elokim Yirah, to have the right approach, and that way you'll be able to transcend, or you'll be able to handle the tribulations and the worries of the world with that in mind.
Yeah, and if I can just add, I think it's easy sometimes, or it's to be simplistic, to look at this as like property bad, and humility good, these things. But the truth is, we're multi-dimensional people living in a very very complicated world. And an individualistic world as well, and I think therefore what I really like about this idea, and what I personally find to be so empowering, is that even though it's a very general thing, everyone has a sukkah, everyone should have a sukkah, everyone should have a lulav, everyone should think this, that, and the other, but you have to find your own space within it, and it just requires some real honesty, and I think that's an additional element over here. No one can really look at another person and say, "Oh, that guy is not, dealing with their poverty in the way that I think they should," or "That guy is not dealing with his wealth,"
or dealing with their wealth, of course.
Yeah, in the right way they can. Although it might be very obvious sometimes, and we might even be correct. Yeah, but the truth is, it's not really the right way to be. The right way is if we look very deeply inside. Obviously, we should share with people that we can and help people to look at things better, of course. But really, this just demands some truth from people. We know where our false gods are. We know where we put trust in other things, and where we don't put trust in Hashem. And when we're sitting there in the sukkah, kind of with half a roof and half the stars, you really do have the ability, to say Hevel Hevolim, 100%. But you got to make that practical for yourself. And really, look and say to yourself, the Ochas Tzadikim says, this is something that my Rabbi, Rabbi Weinberg used to teach. He mentions in Shah HaSimcha in the Ochas Tzadikim, all goodness that comes from simcha is really the opposite of worry. You can look to the things that you worry about, and you got to deal with them properly in the world of Hishtadlut. Of course we do. We got to make effort in this world. But if you can identify the areas of your life where there is worry, in a funny sort of way, it's almost like a signpost, spiritual signpost, to where you can think things through and understand where maybe how to elevate bitachon, how to elevate a bit of trust of Hashem. And when that happens, the worries, that they're still serious concerns, but worry as an emotion, it's not good for people. And we're supposed to try to be able to be boteach, to have trust in a higher power, that Hashem has a plan. And I think that's a beautiful additional element over here. Yes, Hevel Havolim, 100%. But at the same time, we live in a world of hishtadlus, we live in a world of worry. And I think that Sukkos kind of demands that of us, if we do it properly, to really individualize that and to look into our own situations and say, how can I do this better,
Right, Hevel Havolim, not in the sense of being something insignificant, but being in the sense of, and again, each society is different, but Chazal generally didn't encourage poverty or anything. Chazal were not against a person accumulating wealth, but like you said all the way at the beginning, against making it into your destiny and your God, Chas v'Shalom, and
not
being
imbuing
able
it with
to,
meaning.
Right, to take that step back, that the Sukkos or that going out there into the sukkah really allows you to have that contemplation, and like you say, it really is, a very individual pursuit. Right.
Which I think is very beautiful. Because to get to the essence of what the Chag is about, you've got to be honest with your own relationship with God, your own avodat Hashem. And it's very difficult to find time for that. We've got very busy lives over Sukkot. We're dancing and we're singing, and this Simchas this one, and the kids need to go here. There's so much going on. But those moments of introspection, when you can see the stars through the schach, when you say, "Where am I really?" Not in a way that you're beating yourself up. Honest, and that's where the simcha lies. How can I bring this, this amazing partnership between me and Hashem that I have in life, and I know I have in life? How can I bring that into the areas where I'm hurting, where I'm struggling, where I'm worried, where I'm not seeing His hand? Like, how do I bring that in? That taking some time like that brings us to, that's what it's about.
Nice and interesting. I'll just make to conclude. It's an interesting point. Generally when we speak about simcha, when Chazal, when the Rambam, Poskim speak about simcha, they'll say, drink your revius of wine, and have your meat, and get your new clothes, and these are very physical, very simplistic kind of the small joys of life, as it were. But at the same time, Sukkos, perhaps the special simcha of Sukkos, beyond the regular festival simcha, which is true for all of the Yomim Tovim, is this element that you're bringing out here, that it gives you an opportunity to kind of reset your perspective and get yourself aligned with your approach to your physical life, to your general attitude towards your own world, towards the world more broadly, and that's a different kind of simcha. I'm not saying meat and wine are great. I'm all for them, but this gives you a certain inner quiet and inner serenity, which
maybe one way of looking at it is to say, in our society where meat and wine are on the menu for lunch and dinner most days, or at least available. We were talking at the very beginning of the conversation just about an agricultural society, and I think that that these things were these things are demonstrations of luxury. They were demonstrations of plenty. They were reassuring, and when a person's feeling reassured, that's when they can turn their mind to think about deeper things. When they're relaxed, they've had their full, they're reassured.
Taken care of. It's not pulling them. It's not pressing right now.
That's right. Maybe that's the direction.
Good, Rabbi Cowland, thank you very, very much. First time on the show, so I know it's a milestone, and Mir Hashem will have you again soon. And thank you for joining us. Well, I won't take up any more of your important Sukkos contemplation time. So
I'm not going to tell anyone whether I'm going to go contemplate or whether I'm going to go drink wine. That'll be up to
certainly not all of our listeners. Very good. Thank you very much, and good night for the time being.
Bye bye.